Hello, Jeswin.
Yes, sir. Starting.
You can start.
Okay, sir. ഇവിടെ സ്ക്രീൻ കാണാമല്ലോ അല്ലേ ആരെങ്കിലും ഒന്ന് റിപ്ലൈ Okay. So, good morning, everyone. Respected sir and my dear friends. Today, as part of the SCTCE Silver Jubilee Student Webinar Series on Environmental Biotechnology, I'm going to give a brief explanation on what happened with the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico in the year 2010. So now, before understanding about oil spill, it is necessary that we have a small idea about what an oil well is and how oil wells are found. So beneath our earth, there are layers and layers of rock structure which go deep into the earth crust, and often we can find deposits of oil and natural gas among these layers. Now, it is important to know that oil and natural gas is the world's two most important source of energy. So it is absolutely necessary that we locate them and extract them. So the question is, how did we find these deposits which are hidden beneath the Earth's surface? And the answer is very simple. We actually use a technology which is known as the seismic acoustic imaging to locate the object. So for oil wells which are actually located deep in the ocean bed, we use offshore seismic acoustic imaging technology, which actually includes a device to send out wavelets. So here you can see in the animation that there is an acoustic source which is actually sending out the wavelets, and this is actually recorded by another device which is known as the hydrophones. And the hydrophones captures these reflected wavelets, and the wavelets now will give rise to an image. Now this is actually the image which is obtained. Now this image is actually processed using supercomputers, and geoscientists who especially work on the oil wells, they can actually pinpoint the exact location of the deposit. And after all this, the location is actually finalized after a lot of factors, and usually the safest well path is always chosen. So now, after the deposit has been found out, the next process is to begin drilling. And for this, a drill is inserted within a case. Now you can see in the image that a driller is actually inserted within a case, and it is used to drill through the rock layer. Now see, now it is actually drilling through the rock layers. Once this drilling is carried out, we actually pass drilling mud. Now you can see that the drilling mud is being passed through the drill bit. This has basically three functions. That is to provide a casing, and the second one is to keep the drill bit cool and lubricated, and the third function is to equalize the pressure. Here we have to remember that the drilling is actually occurring under very high pressure. So it is necessary that we equalize these pressures, and otherwise a lot of problems can happen. So it is necessary that we equalize these pressures. Now, the entire equipment is actually, that is the drilling bit. Then there are a lot of device which is associated with the drilling process. Now, these entire equipments is actually placed in a platform, and this platform is called as an oil rig. In our case, the platform which is the oil rig is called as Deepwater Horizon. Now, this is actually just a small idea about how oil wells are located. Sorry, how oil deposits are located and identified, and how they are extracted. Because this knowledge is actually necessary to understand more about the oil spill. Now we can look into our case, which is the Deepwater Horizon. The Deepwater Horizon was actually an ultra deep water offshore drilling oil rig, which was owned by a company named Transocean, and it was located in the Gulf of Mexico in the coast of Louisiana. The construction of the oil rig started in December 1998, and finally the completed rig was delivered on 23rd February 2001. So what happens is that a particular company is going to build an oil rig, which is the platform, and they will lease this platform to another company, so that that company can come and can drill the oil well, and they can thus extract the oil which is found in the deeper layers. So here in Deepwater Horizon, the oil rig was actually owned by Transocean, like I said. So what Transocean did was that they actually leased this platform to another company which is known as the British Petroleum. The British Petroleum is commonly called as BP. Now throughout the presentation, I will just say BP. It actually means that it is British Petroleum. Now, the Deepwater Horizon was leased to BP from 2001 to September 2030. And for this, the Transocean used to earn $500,000 a day, because we know that the fossil fuel industry is actually a multi-million-dollar industry. So the Transocean used to earn around $500,000 a day. Now, in the year 2009, the rig drilled the deepest oil well in the history at a vertical depth of 35,000 feet. That is around 10,700 meters. So these are actually the accomplishments of the Deepwater Horizon. That is before the oil spill had happened. So they made history by drilling the deepest oil well. Now, these are the names of the company. You can see that it's Transocean and BP's British Petroleum. Now, I will come back to the other companies, that is the Halliburton and Cameron International, later on in the presentation. So everything was going well and accordingly to BP's plan. Now, BP was actually overlooking the entire Deepwater Horizon. However, on 20th April 2010, everything changed because a sudden explosion happened. A powerful explosion rocked the Deepwater Horizon drilling platform in the Gulf of Mexico, and it became one of the world's largest oil spill, where oil gushed at 130 liters per second, that is 400,000 liters per hour. Now, what I'm going to show is actually a real video of the oil being gushed into the ocean bed at about 130 liters per second. You can see that the oil is gushing into the ocean bed. This is actually a real video. Now, this is actually a very huge amount of oil. So considering it is actually 130 liters per second. So for 400,000 liters per hour, it's actually a huge amount of oil. And out of the 126 workers who were on that rig that day, 11 of the workers lost their lives and several other workers were faced with severe injuries. Now, after the explosion had happened, the first priority was to actually save the platform. That is the Deepwater Horizon, the platform which is present on the ocean surface. All efforts were actually done to save the platform. However, all efforts failed, and eventually 2 days later, which is on 23rd April, the platform sank to the ocean floor. So far, you might think that this is actually a natural disaster, right? However, I will explain it to you furthermore, which will make you understand that this is exactly a man-made incident. Now, the first thing BP did after leasing the Deepwater Horizon was that they hired another company called Halliburton. Now, I had told about Halliburton while presenting. Yes, this is the company Halliburton. Now, the Halliburton company was given the responsibility to drill the oil well. Now, deeply looking into the scenario, we can see that the drilling operation, which was carried out by Halliburton under the assistance of BP, it was supposed to be completed in 90 days, that is 90 days. However, this was way behind schedule. The reason for being behind schedule was that a lot of setback arose during drilling, and BP was actually tensed because they were losing millions of dollars due to this lag in schedule. So what they did was that they pressurized their workers to drill the oil well faster. That is, they were ready to sacrifice their safety in order to save money, because BP was actually losing millions of dollars per day. So this actually shows their greed for money and was ultimately putting people's life at risk with unsafe operation. Now, when I explained about the drilling process, I told about how we put drilling mud inside the drilling case, right? This is actually to provide a cool and a lubricated condition to the driller inside. Now here, what BP did was that they pressurized the workers to drill the rig very fast. Now, what happens is that when the when it is drilled very fast, it can actually cause minute fractures. You can see in the animation that it has actually caused minute fractures, and the drilling mud is now escaping through these fractures. Now, this actually caused the drilling mud to escape, and thus the pressurized gas started to rise up through these fractures. It was slowly becoming an explosive hazard. As you can see now, the pressurized gas was slowly building up. It is not like that all of a sudden the pressure just build up. The pressurized gas was slowly building up through these fractures. Now, however, it actually gave out pressure reading because the workers on the above, they were actually constantly monitoring the drilling function, and it actually gave out pressure reading about 3000 units, which is actually abnormal. Usually the pressure units doesn't go beyond 1200 units, I think. So it actually gave a pressure reading of 3000 units. However, BP again here, British Petroleum, they chose to ignore this reading, and they forced the workers to continue drilling. Now, the second thing is that during the drilling, the drill bit can never run absolutely straight, because you can just imagine, right? There are a lot of layers of rock beneath the ocean bed. So you can't just put your drill, and you can't just assume that the drill bit will go straight ahead. No, there are actually a lot of bending can happen, because there are a lot of layers of rock beneath the ocean bed. So what is usually done is that the companies often use centralizers to stabilize the pipe. You can see in the image that this is actually the image of a centralizer, the red one. So its purpose is to stabilize the pipe while it is being drilled. Now, the drilling company, in case of Deepwater Horizon, which is the Halliburton, I have mentioned Halliburton, they actually recommended 23 stabilizers to stabilize the pipe while drilling. However, BP only ordered and installed only 6 of the centralizers. Now, what happened was that the pipe was actually bending to one side. As you can see in the animation, the problem with this is that while drilling very fast, the drill bit will bend to one side, and it will weaken the cement supporting the casing on that side. Now, here you can see, once the drill bit is actually bent, now cement is being passed through these casing. You can see that there is a minute amount of space in between the drill bit. This is actually a very huge flow. So this flow could have been easily been detected if they had conducted a cement bond test. Now, cement bond test is actually conducted to find out about the integrity of the cement. So the workers could have easily detected this flow by conducting just a simple test. However, here again BP ordered that this test wasn't necessary at all, and that they could continue drilling. Now, as a result of this, the gas and oil slowly started to shoot up the well bore, and slowly started to shoot up the well bore. But here the next thing is that since in case of an oil well, there are a lot of safety measures. This is to actually prevent any kind of disasters, because different types of oil wells are located in Gulf of Mexico and around the world. So they usually a lot of safety measures are there to prevent any kind of disaster. So one such device is the blowout preventer. As you can see in the image, just at the bottom of the seabed, there is a device called the blowout preventer, which is also called as BOP. Now, the BOP is installed before the drilling of the oil bed starts. So the purpose of the BOP, or the blowout preventer, is to seal the oil pipe in case of any blowout or any severe damage in the pipeline. So what BOP was supposed to do that, it was supposed to seal the oil pipe in case of damage. And in our case, the Deepwater Horizon, the BOP was actually manufactured by a company called Cameron International. And there were actually, the BOP didn't work well. That is why the explosion eventually happened. Now, there was actually many fault. There were indications of many fault in the BOP design. However, again, BP chose to ignore this, because BP anyhow wanted to make money. They wanted to drill out the oil for their processing purpose. What happened with the BOP in the Deepwater Horizon was that, as you can see, the pressure was actually building up. Slowly, pressure was actually building up, which actually forced the oil to gush upwards. So what happened was that the hydraulic valve of the BOP has actually a lot of valves. So this hydraulic valve was supposed to cut the pipe. However, the hydraulic valve of the BP was too weak to build up enough pressure, because from the bottom pressure was rising up and oil and gas was actually gushing upwards. So it couldn't find some pressure to cut through the pipe, and instead it could only squeeze through the pipe without actually sealing it. That is, it could only just bend a portion of the pipe and it couldn't cut through the pipe. So eventually pressure was actually building up. Like I said before, pressure was building up and pressure burst open the BOP, and thus oil started to gush upwards, and it was releasing massive amount of oil into the ocean, that is at about 130 liters per second. Now, as part of this webinar, I have actually watched a lot of documentaries concerning the Deepwater Horizon explosion, but this is actually a very good movie. That is the Deepwater Horizon movie, and this movie is actually all the events shown in this movie is very close to real life. I have actually researched about this movie, so now I will be showing you some clips in the movie just so that you can understand how the explosion happened. Audio കേൾക്കാമോ? Can anyone hear the audio? Hello?
കേൾക്കാം. Yes, കേൾക്കാം.
So I will be actually showing you 5 videos. The first video is actually, now this is actually showing that the pressure is building up. Like I said, the pressure and the drilling mud was actually escaping through the fracture, and the pressure was actually building up. Now the second thing that happened was that after the pressure was building up, the oil explosion happened. That is, oil and gas at very high pressure gushed upwards to the platform. These are all actually parts of the movie. I have actually cut from the original movie. Now the third thing was happened, like I said, when oil is gushing upwards, there are a lot of gas which is actually trapped underneath. Now the gas is also released along with this oil. I think around 225,000 amount of methane gas was released along with the explosion. The first thing that happened was that oil explosion happened. Now gas was being released into the atmosphere, and this eventually caused the explosion. So you can here actually you can see that a person was actually being thrown out while he was bathing, right? Now this was actually Mr. Jimmy Harrell. He was actually the supervisor on Deepwater Horizon, and he worked for the Transocean. Now this is actually a real case scenario. While the explosion happened, he was actually bathing. Now he was actually thrown out due to the explosion. However, he survived that day. And finally, I will show you one more video, which is actually the blowout preventer, which is failing to cut through the pipe. Eventually, these all led to the explosion. Now, if you have time, I would really recommend you to watch this movie. It's actually a very good movie, and all the scenarios are actually happened. All the scenarios happened in the real life. So, moving on. Now you got an idea about how the explosion had happened. Now, after the explosion had happened, the BP's greatest concern was that the crude will reach the mainland, which is just 80 kilometers away. And they wanted to avoid such a widely visible scenario, because people are going to protest if coal or crude oil is going to wash up their shore. So, in order to prevent this, BP and the US Coast Guard first intentionally burned around 40 million liters of oil on the surface of water itself. You can see in the image that oil is being burned on the surface of the water itself, and which only removed a small portion of the leak. Like I said, 130 liters of oil were gushing out per second. Now 40 million liters is actually a very small amount when compared to the oil which has been released into the ocean bed. Now the burning of the oil couldn't stop or couldn't remove the amount of oil. So what they agreed upon was that they agreed to spray a chemical dispersant in an unprecedented scale. That is in a massive amount without any particular regulation. Now, the chemical dispersant they used here was actually Correxit. That is, you can see it in the slide. It's actually Correxit, and it typically means corrects it. So the massive amount of dispersants were actually dispersed, that is around 1.84 million gallons, which are according to the official reports. You can see that the plane is dispersing this dispersant into the ocean. Now, these 1.84 million gallons of dispersant is according to the official reports. Now, the actual amount can be higher than what actually is shown. So, one interesting fact about Corexit is that it is actually banned in Europe. However, the regulators in US were less strict. So BP gets the go ahead to disperse the dispersant in massive amounts. Now, what Corexit does is that it is actually a combination of the chemical that will break the oil down into tiny globules. Now, as you can see in the animation, the chemical is trying to break down the oil into tiny globules, thus sinking it into the ocean bed, and it will remain suspended inside the ocean bed. Now, this is a real video showing the oil globules being dispersed in the ocean bed. This is actually invisible to the naked eye, because if during the first few months of the explosion, or during the first month, the oil will actually be seen on the surface of the water. However, they deployed Corexit, which actually broke down the oil into tiny globules, and they dispersed it inside the ocean bed so that nothing is visible on the surface. And when people actually see the surface or they see the ocean, it looks very clean, right? Now, BP had actually a major disadvantage. The Corexit had actually a big disadvantage. However, British Petroleum, they said that the Corexit is actually a non-hazardous chemical, and they also started to disperse the dispersant 1,500 meters below the sea level. That is inside the ocean bed. They started to disperse the dispersant, which is Corexit, at about 500,000 liters of Corexit was dispersed inside the ocean bed. And when critical scientists and people started to protest against this, the dispersing of the dispersant inside the ocean bed was stopped, and the further deployment was no longer publicly documented. So this is what happened. Now, British Petroleum, they continuously kept on saying that the Corexit is actually a very good chemical. It doesn't have any disadvantages, but their toxicity reports were actually outdated, and they were not ready to own up to the fact that the BP is actually a human health hazard. So what the Corexit does is that, you can see in the animation, it will break the blood vessel and the blood cells, which can actually cause kidney damage, liver damage, blood disorder, and it is even capable of killing babies in the womb. And also the ship which went for the cleaning after the oil spill had happened, they actually reported a massive increase in the engine problems. Usually ships are designed to withstand the conditions inside the ocean, and usually engine repairs are very less. However, those ships which went out for cleaning, they reported massive increase in the engine problems. This was because the Corexit was actually dissolving the rubber seals inside the engine. Now, BP, they actually said that no, Corexit is actually a very good chemical. It doesn't have any side effects. That is, they were not owning up to what they have done. And the next thing BP did after deploying Corexit was that they hired a lot of workers to clean up the beaches, as the oil slowly started to deposit on the sand as tar balls. Because as you can see in the image, the oil slowly started to deposit on the beach. You can see that the oil is looking like a tar ball. Now, lot of workers were actually hired to remove these tar balls, either by hand picking or by using a shovel. And the BP's main focus was actually to keep the oil out of the mainland and making it invisible to naked eye. So they weren't actually worried about the environmental implications they are actually causing. They just wanted to keep the oil out of the mainland, out of the reach of the people, and they didn't want the oil to be visible by the naked eye. But all the methods they adopted were actually very defective, and all were old school methods. Now, what BP could have done was that there were many methods which are actually being proposed by scientists all around the world, because this was the world's largest oil spill. So the scientists said that the pumps can be used to suck the oil out of the ocean, and that can be separated from water, and then water can be released back into the ocean. Now you can see in the animation that the pumps are actually sucking up the oil, and the water is being separated from them, and the water is being released back into the ocean. However, before this could be done, the first thing they did was first they intentionally burned oil. And the second thing they did was that they dispersed correxit. Now, the correxit actually breaks the oil layer, like I said before. Sorry, it will break the oil layer and it will sink them. That is, it can no longer be removed by pumps. Also, BP could have skimmed off the oil from the surface. Now, after the very first month after the explosion, oil is usually seen on the surface of the oil bed. So it can just be skimmed off the surface just like how we skim of the cream from the milk. So it could have been skimmed off from the ocean surface, but instead what they did was that they immediately deployed correxit, and this eventually broke down the oil globules, and eventually the marshes and the beaches were actually flooded with oil. Also, they could have used oil-eating bacteria like Marinobacter, Oceanospirillus. We have already heard and read about oil-eating bacteria, right? They could have used these oil-eating bacteria. However, when they deployed correxit, the straight-chain hydrocarbons were converted into cyclic hydrocarbons. Now, the reason with oil-eating bacteria is that they can only eat straight-chain hydrocarbon oil molecules. And usually the oils are in the straight chain form. However, correxit made the straight chain hydrocarbon into the cyclic chain form, and thus the bacteria could no longer eat these cyclic chain hydrocarbons, and thus oil was actually dispersed in the ocean bed, and they didn't do anything which they could have been done. Now, the thing is that BP had several ways to reduce the effects of the oil spill, but they had no concern over the environmental implication. Like I said before, they only wanted to keep the coal or the oil out of the mainland, and they also wanted to make it invisible to the naked eye. So they didn't know the environmental implication they have caused. The spill has caused around 82,000 birds. The spill has killed about 82,000 birds of 102 species, 6,615 sea turtles, 25,900 marine mammals, and the number is actually going up because even we don't know, still we don't know how much damage we have created, and many other creatures. As for the habitat, it destroyed the underwater areas, including the substantial habitat for a rare dwarf seahorse species, and thousands of miles of shoreline, including the beaches and the marshes, took a terrible toll on species like seagrass, beach mice, and shorebirds. Now, these were actually dependent on the habitat surrounding the shoreline, which is in the marshes and beaches. Now, even they took a really bad toll upon the oil spill. In the write-up, I had actually included a statement of Tony Hayward. He was the former executive of British Petroleum. Now, these two are actually his quotes about the oil spill. Now, he said that the Gulf of Mexico is a very big ocean, and the amount of volume of oil and the dispersant we are putting into it is tiny in relation to the total water volume. And another statement he made is that I think the environmental impact of this disaster is likely to have been very, very modest. That is, been very, very small. Now, you know why I said that this is the biggest lie in this particular century, because this oil spill has damaged the millions of ecosystem inside the inside the ocean bed, and it has killed a lot of marine mammals. Now, there is also a phenomenon which is known as upwelling. Now, upwelling is the process by which the nutrients in the seabed is actually lifted and it is carried away by natural current. Now, this is actually a natural process. However, after the oil spill had happened, there was actually layers of oil plume inside the ocean bed. Now, the upwelling natural process, they took up the oil plume and they actually started to carry it away to the different locations, thus spreading the oil spill. Now, this is actually a natural phenomenon. We can't just stop upwelling process. Now, the after effects of the spill was actually really concerning, and the images are actually very sad. What I'm going to show you. The environmental implications were actually mostly felt by the residents of Louisiana, because their daily livelihood was actually dependent on shrimp processing, and they used to process around 100,000 pounds of product every year. Now, this amount has dramatically reduced. This is because even a small or a minuscule amount of oil is enough to kill a young shrimp. And you can imagine just how much of the damage we have caused, because 130 liters of oil were gushing per second. Even a minuscule amount can kill a young shrimp. So if oil was gushing at this rate, the damage we have created is actually very huge. Now, and eventually all the shrimps have died. This is actually what has been discussed. I think all the shrimp ecosystem were actually destroyed by the oil spill. And sorry, and all this time the oil well was actually still open. That is, all attempts to cap the oil well was a huge failure, because it was 1500 meter below the ocean surface. So they were constantly trying to cap the oil well. However, all efforts were a failure. Now, after 750 million liters of oil spill and 90 days later, that is 90 days later, after the explosion on July 15, 2010, they were successful to put a temporary cap on the wellhead, and they permanently sealed the oil well around mid-September. Now, like I said, the total amount of the oil which has been released is 750 million liters. Now, this is actually a very huge amount. It's a massive amount of oil. That is why this is the world's largest oil spill. The scientists have concluded that the Deepwater Horizon oil spill has killed thousands of marine mammals and sea turtles and has contaminated their habitats. All these images are very depressing, because all these animals, the marine mammals, they were largely affected by this oil spill. The northern Gulf of Mexico was actually home to 22 species of marine mammals and 5 species of sea turtles in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, the scientists have identified that 4 species were exposed to oil spill, and the 5th species is most likely to be dead. We don't know for sure, and it is actually just a theory that the 5th species is almost dead because they are nowhere to be seen. And then these mammals have been exposed to oil by inhalation, by aspiration, by contaminated sediment, by prey, or by absorbing the contaminant through their skin. Now, this has shown adverse health effects such as reproductive failure, organ damage, decreased mobility, exhaustion, dehydration, decreased ability to feed and evade predators, and thus all this is actually contributing to the unusually largest and longest marine mammal mortality ever recorded in the Gulf of Mexico. The dolphins had a decreased survival and reproductive success in the years following the spill, leading to 50% decline in their population. And the fishes were still contaminated with hydrocarbon even after a decade. The reports after a decade, that is in 2000, the spill had actually happened in 2010. Now, the reports which were taken in 2020 showed that tens and thousands of workers who actually first responded to the spill are now suffering from respiratory illness or have actually died. Like I said before, Karaxit was a human health hazard, and lot of people have actually died, or they are actually suffering from a lot of illness. However, after all this, now the BP was actually held responsible because all the companies which were involved in the drilling of the oil well were held responsible. Now, BP paid around $20.8 billion, which is actually, I think it is the largest amount which has been paid as a fine for an oil spill disaster. The BP paid around $20.8 billion. The Transocean, who own the platform, that is the oil rig, the Deepwater Horizon, they paid around $1.4 billion. And the Cameron International, that is the company which designed the blowout preventer, they paid around $250 million. And the Halliburton, that is the drilling company, they paid around $1.1 billion for the spill they have caused. However, still after a decade, now scientists know for a fact that 70% of the leaked oil still roams through the Gulf. Now, the oil is now in smaller particles. Like I said before, Karaxit actually break the oil into tiny globules, right? The oil is now present as smaller particles, which makes it more toxic for some ocean life, and these oil particles can easily enter into the food chain. In addition to this, around 225,000 tons of methane was also spilled into the ocean. Now, this is actually a very concerning issue. Now, These are actually some of my suggestions. Now, today the oil is actually dispersed in the ocean bed and it is invisible to our eyes. Now, like I said before, Karaxit actually broke down the oil into tiny globules, dispersing it inside the ocean bed. But when it is seen from the above, it is actually invisible. Now, however, if we can do something to aggregate the dispersed oil particles, maybe by a bacteria which can accumulate them into a huge ball and which can cause them to float on the ocean surface again, then somehow they can be removed easily by skimming it off or by picking it up. The another suggestions is that the Karaxit actually converted the straight chain hydrocarbons to cyclic hydrocarbons, right? Now, if by any chance, if we could convert these cyclic hydrocarbons back to straight chain form, then it can be given to degradation by bacteria like Marinobacter, Oceanospirillus. They can actually degrade the straight chain oil. So this is actually also another possibility. It's just my pure suggestions. And one of the major thing is that this is actually something we can achieve. That is, other sources of energy need to be quickly established because there is a lot of dependency and pressure on the fossil fuel industry because our world is running on fossil fuels, right? So if other sources of energy are now actually being found out, but then they have to be implemented all around the world so that this will actually relieve the pressure on the fossil fuel dependency. Now, the Deepwater Horizon spill, this is actually still the condition of the Gulf of Mexico after the oil spill. This is actually 11 years after. This is actually a picture taken in 2021, that is this year. The price which has been paid by the company is actually very huge, but then still it is unacceptable because the spill has massively degraded the ecosystem and devastated all wildlife which depended on the ecosystem. And even now we still don't know how much damage we have released. The cleanup efforts which were initially done will only remove a fraction of the persistent oil and gas which were actually spilled. The remaining oil, including millions of gallons in the Gulf, will still continue to poison the wildlife for generations. And it is definitely affecting a lot of people who are actually dependent on the Gulf, on its rich body of water for food, for culture, for environmental recreation, and for environmental enrichment. So after the explosion, still now the Gulf is actually being poisoned by the oil. There hasn't been any good decisions to remove the oil. And like I said before, the damage we have created, even we don't know how much damage we have released just because of the oil spill. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeswin.
Thank you, sir.
I will just share the link for the feedback. Participants may submit their feedback online. See you in the next class. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
പേരും ബ്രാൻഡ്